All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm excited to have Travis Robbins with us here. He's one of the gurus for coaching and in the physical therapy space. He actually has clinics himself, but he's going to share with us today 6 key metrics that you really need to be paying attention to significantly increase your income here in the next 12 months. So excited to have you on here, Travis. Welcome.
Thanks. All right, let me share my screen here. And I have to do a slideshow because if I don't, I just start talking and talking and talking, and then it never stops. So we'll try to keep this as condensed as possible. But really, I want to talk about measuring what matters in private practice. And we'll talk about kind of my story of metrics and how it can kind of get a little bit overwhelming, and how I can hopefully try to kind of zone it in for you guys that are listening right now. So 6 metrics you need to keep an eye on to grow your practice from 20 to 40% in 2024. So that's what we'll kind of focus on today. So the whirlwind is tough. So Neil, you know this. You've had a practice and you have an extremely large business now with lots of different staff and lots of moving parts. And the whirlwind can be really tough for private practice. It's really, I mean, the first thing is patient care, right? So when you first open your doors, you're like, okay, I've got to do a good job treating patients. And then you've got to start taking on all this other stuff. So marketing, that your audience knows a ton about that. I was actually listening to your most recent podcast, and we did a webinar with you a while ago to our list, and it was really great. Like we were taking notes the whole time, and then I brought this back to my team, and I was like, "Hey, you guys got to start working on this stuff because we're not doing all this stuff." And then you just had a podcast that was just specific about content and blog posts, and I'm like, that's like one tiny section of this marketing division, which is enormous in its own. So
Right.
there's just so much going on between human resources, billing collections, finance, growth strategy, like making sure that you're heading in the right direction, onboarding and training, recruiting and hiring, IT and cybersecurity. Oh my goodness. I just had a call with my cybersecurity team. Like, yeah, we really need to kind of crank this up. I'm like, come on, man. I got like a million things going on. And now you're telling me about like extra services and things I got to do to protect my business, and just kind of getting like super busy in this overwhelm. And
It's a
I,
lot. Yeah.
yeah, everybody's been there. I'm sure you've been there this week, Neil, in like
Yep.
your own business, and you're just like, I just want to pull the covers over my head and start over again tomorrow. But if you can try to focus in on the things that really make the biggest difference, then that can just mentally help you feel a little bit better, but also kind of decrease that overwhelm type sensation. And for us, we want to try to focus in on the things that help us grow. And I always think about this. So I don't follow a ton of like financial news information, but every once in a while my TV will flip over to CNN, and then you'll see these huge companies. And like, I'm a CEO of a company, right? Neil,
Hmm.
you're a CEO of a company. I'm like, how do you run a company with like thousands and thousands of employees and different divisions? And that human being on the other side of that has the same amount of time in a day that I have.
Right.
And then I kind of bring it down into my own practice. We work with tons of different size practices, a lot of one man or one woman shows that just kind of do like their own thing, and they treat patients. We work with organizations that have 20, 30 different locations. And it's like, well, same thing. Like they have the same amount of time that me with my, we're opening up our seventh location on Monday. And there's some people that have 17 or 27. Like what are the things that they're focusing on that I should be focusing on in order to kind of make things go? And through us, one of the great cool things that webinar isn't about me, but I'm a private practice owner. I still run my own private practice. And I got into consulting to try to help out other private practice owners, because if there's, one thing that I know just a little bit better, if I can teach it to somebody else and it helps them out, that makes me feel good. And then we got into billing and collections. We have a billing and collections company because we saw a huge opportunity there in terms of the ability to help out practices by cleaning up their billing and collections. So one of the cool things that as a result of that is we get to see a lot of different practices, and we get to see a lot of different numbers. So we're start kind of aggregating all this data
Hmm.
and just try to find out, what are the practices that are doing really well focusing on. And that's one of the cool opportunities that we have. So today's goal, if you're listening to this, is just to get owners to stop majoring in minor things. I heard that recently, I think on a podcast somewhere. And I'm like, why
I
don't I
love
just spend
that.
an hour like writing this, email that, I didn't even end up sending out, or I'm trying to focus in on, let's pick a marketing thing, right? Like, what is the number one thing that people waste time on? It's like their logo. It's like, oh my God, this is the most important thing, right? I got to make sure that I spend hours and hours on this logo to make sure that's right. And I just kind of find myself like, why did I just spend all my time on that when I could have been focused on something that would have a bigger impact in my practice? So that's kind of what the cool part of doing the consulting and billing and collection stuff that we do.
Yeah.
So I want to go over 6 metrics, and if you're listening to this and you want to comment on this in any way, I'm always looking for feedback. But for me, after working with tons of practices, these are the things that I see. It's like pulling the biggest levers in your practice. Like where can, if you have a limited amount of time, if you don't want to be working like 80, 90 hours a week, you actually want to spend time, going golfing and maybe some time with your family, and you just kind of focused on a couple things. These are the things that you would focus on. Another exercise that I do with clients is, okay, next week, I'm only going to let you work for 5 hours. Now, they're not going to do that because that's not what they do. But if you only had 5 hours or even like 1 hour, like anybody can do this right now. If you only had 1 hour next week that you could work on your practice, what would you focus on if you only had that small amount of time? So these are the things that I want you to focus on. So revenue per visit. If you guys have heard me talk before, you've heard me talk about this because it can have such a huge impact in your practice. What we find is that when practices become more profitable, then the owner can kind of remove themselves, at least partially, from doing all of the treatment and all of the different things that we talked about on that first slide that they feel like they have to control because they have a little bit more breathing room to try to pay usually another PT to come in and at least treat some of the visits so they can start working on their business instead of in their business. So the
Yeah.
definition of revenue per visit is the average revenue from your closed claims. So this is really important when you're pulling this information from somewhere. A lot of pushback we get from us, I don't know where to find this information in my EMR, my billing services. One, if you have a billing company and they can't provide you this information, you probably should find a new billing company because it's a really important number. So you've got to be able to kind of find that information from closed claims because if you have open claims in there, then you've got a bunch of zeros that are going to bring your revenue per visit down.
Mhm.
And it's not revenue divided by visits over time. A lot of owners will do this. That will give you an idea of what that is. But as everybody knows, if I treat a visit today, I'm not getting paid for that visit today unless I'm in a cash business. So there's a lag in payment. So understanding that is important. If you take it over a large period of time, like last year, if you took all your revenue from last year and took all your visits, you get an idea, but it's still not an exact number. And those are things that you want to try to keep an eye on. So the keys to success here are one, finding the right data. So you've got to get a starting point. Ask your billing company, look in your EMR, and try to find that information. Then start asking questions. And the questions really is what is it right now? What do I want it to be? And when we first look at this, sometimes that can be difficult. Like we have general norms for all the different states that we work in terms of a billing company. So I have an idea of what that should be depending on your treatment model, how much, I mean, it's time-based stuff, right? So if people are spending a certain amount of time with patients, you can get an idea of what those units should be. But what do you want it to be? And what we see is usually there's at least a $10 to $20 improvement that you can see if you have an understanding of what the insurance companies want and an understanding of how to express that to them. So
Yeah.
what we use, I know, Neil, we've talked in the past, an average size clinic for someone that works with you is usually around 200 visits a week. You might have more or less, doesn't really matter. But if you improve that by $10 a visit on 200 visits, that's $2,000 a week. And you multiply that by 52, and that gives you an idea of the amount of room that there is for improvement here.
Yeah,
So,
it's huge.
yeah,
And the
so
thing too
it's,
there, I think, is that in the PT world, right? You're a service-based business, so you only have a finite amount of time for treating patients. So you need to make sure that every hour that you're treating a patient, that you're getting the maximum revenue from that visit, right? And that could a lot of times you don't know these things until you start digging, right? Until you get these metrics in front of you, and then you're like, holy cow! Then you realize, like, hey, there's a lot of things that we are missing here, um, that can make a big impact on your bottom line.
yeah, I think some practice owners are a little bit nervous to even look at that number. They're thinking like, I don't know, like if I look under this rock, am I going to find a big
Right.
snake that can bite me? I'm telling you right now, the sooner you pick up the rock, the
Yeah.
the better it's going to be for you. You want to find this stuff out. You have to kind of face the facts of what's going on in your practice, and this is one of the first places that we start. So in terms of like next actions, we talked about you've got to find out what that number is, but then what I want you to do is I want you to look at your highest and lowest provider because that will give you a pretty good indication of what information you're giving to your team. Like, have you trained them on how to code for visits and bill properly for physical therapy? A lot of people have not. I know I didn't when I got out. I was just kind of, well, my clinical instructor did this, and so this is what I do. This is what I've always been doing. But
Yeah.
understanding what
Because
that
your
is,
team's learning from whoever they were apprenticing with, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's the bottom line, is like they whatever past job methods that they were doing for their billing is what they're bringing into your practice. So you're completely right there in that you need to have a good training, and like here's the way that you should be billing, right? You could be leaving a lot on the table.
yeah. And what we've looked at in working with insurance companies more is looking at what they really want. So
Mhm.
why does an insurance company pay you more for certain codes versus other codes? Like typically therapeutic exercise is the lowest reimbursed code. But what we see a ton of with practice, well, in school, I just did 3 therapeutic exercise and a manual therapy. That's just kind of what we gave everybody. Well, they're
Mhm.
paying you less for that. And it's not just kind of like, well, we should just bill for the higher reimbursed code because it's going to help you out financially. That is going to help you out financially, but you have to ask the question, why are they asking you to do that? Because it's a higher skilled code. Like
Mhm.
if you're going to do neuromuscular education and therapeutic activity, those by definition are higher skilled modalities, and that's what the insurance company wants you to be doing. So when you're
Mhm.
having sometimes a difficult time, and I don't get a ton of pushback on this. Once you explain it in a reasonable way to a therapist, like, yeah, neuromuscular education, therapeutic activity, read the definition. This is what we're doing, and the insurance company wants you to do more of that, so we're just going to do more of that. So understanding that is going to be really important. Length of stay is something else that has kind of had some controversy around it in terms of when you go to a typical therapist, hey, we need to improve our length of stay. What a typical therapist say, well, you just want us to make sure we're treating these patients more. Not always. It's really more a definition of how good a job are we doing with completing plans of care. And we'll get into that in
Mhm.
a second. But it's the average number of visits per plan of care. It's not your visits divided by initial evaluations over time. The shorter period of time, same thing with our revenue per visit, you're going to run into some trouble there. The data is not going to be super clean because if you have a bunch of initial evaluations on the front or back end of that time period, then that's going to throw your numbers. But it's if you closed, let's say, 10 cases this week, and you take the average of the number of times they came in, and then that is going to be your length of stay.
Is that something they would get from their EMR, or is it something they would have to track more manually across the front desk?
And they will get that from their EMR if they're doing a good job of closing cases. So that's what we see a lot of times in practices. It's like, yeah, the patient was done with therapy, but we didn't do anything in our EMR to designate that this case is closed, open case versus closed case.
Gotcha. Okay.
Most EMRs that we see will have that feature, but the therapists have to make sure that they're closing the case. So when they actually
Right.
do discharge a patient, we don't love the term discharge, but we say graduation, but if they've completed their plan of care positively or negatively, right? So if they came 16 times and had great outcomes and they took a picture and we put them on the wall and they're super happy, that is a closed case. But also, if someone comes 3 times and they disappear and you're not keeping track of that, that's a closed case too. So if you're not closing those
Yeah.
cases, which is where we typically see the problems, your data is going to be a little bit off. So you have
Yeah,
to,
and the bigger the company, the more therapists, the more those things fall through the cracks, right? And that's where you have a lot of camouflaged holes, basically, right?
yeah, exactly. So first thing you got to do is try to find out what that number is. Now, you can, no matter what EMR you have, it might take a little bit of work depending on how well your clinicians are cleaning up cases, but it's definitely worth going back and trying to find out, okay, what does this look like? Just take over the last 100 cases that you've done. Just go through your
Mhm.
last 100 initial evaluations, maybe go back like 6 months from now and say, okay, for sure, at least most of these cases 6 months from now should be closed positively or negatively, and then try to find that number and then see what that is. I love asking um owners this number because like, oh, it's probably, I don't know, like 17, 18, something like that. And then we end up finding out for whatever reason, when we first look at it, it always ends on 9. I have no idea why that is, but the length of stay is 9. Here's what most practitioners think. They think, well, the people are coming like 8 times, 9 times, 10 times. That's not really what's happening. Your successful cases are coming longer
Mhm.
because usually a longer length of stay associated with better clinical outcomes. And you're having a lot of drop-offs. So it's people that are coming once or twice. And especially when a clinic is busy, they're not, if they have someone drop off, it's like they just fill them in with another new
Right.
case and they're not really keeping an eye on that.
Mhm.
So that's really important. So the next actions there in terms of what you need to do is just kind of getting clinicians behind case management. And that has been something that I haven't seen a ton in clinics. Like if you ask a PT, like what is their job or how are we measuring if they're a good PT or not a good PT? For me, it's case management. It's knowing how many cases you have that you're in charge of. And when you do initial evaluation, you've got to take some ownership of that. Like that's
Mhm.
your job to get them to a successful graduation, whatever that looks like for the patient, depending on their goals. But we don't find that a lot of practices are tracking that. So that really is case management. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And through that process, you're trying to eliminate dropouts. So when we have a dropout, so that in our organization, A dropout is someone that comes 5 times or less and is not successfully graduated. If we have a vestibular patient, sometimes we see those length of stay like 2 or 3, we fix them real quick and get them out. But that's a successful graduation. We've achieved their goals. They've gone through that whole process. What happens a lot is people will come 2 or 3 times, they'll drop off, and there's no system to make sure that you're finding those out, because you want to find out what happened one way or the other. We get tons of great feedback from the patients that love us, but sometimes some of the most important feedback is the patient that came like once or twice or 3 times, and what happened? Did we not
Right.
explain the insurance properly? I had this huge deductible and no one told me about that. Well, that seems odd. We usually explain that in the first visit. Maybe we had somebody new that was training and didn't do it properly, so we've got to try to find those holes in what's happening in our systems. But for us, when we look at like what is poor performance costing you, plans of care, like when we work with our practice, it's usually increasing that at least 2 visits per plan of care. So
Mhm.
take your initial evaluations, whatever that is. If you see 10 initial evaluations in a week, if you were to add 2 to that, again, not by trying to overutilize their insurance, more just kind of better case management, making sure you're getting rid of those 1s, 2s, 3s in length of stay and turning them into 10s, 12, 14s, whatever that ends up being. It ends up being a significant amount of money by the end of the year. Because if you take all of your initial evaluations for this year and add 2 to that length of stay, it's going to result
Mhm.
in a significant
And
amount.
what most people don't realize too is that that really affects your PR and your marketing, right? Because if you have people dropping off, they're not going to be great advocates for your practice. So that can really impact how that you get referrals in. It can impact how you don't know what they say if they go back to their doctor, right? So there's like these unintended consequences by not controlling that drop rate within the clinic.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a huge point to be made there, is just like, if you're having a hard time getting this across to your therapist, tell them about that. It's like,
Mhm.
what is this person going to say to their friends or family members, or certainly even like the referral sources? Like, it doesn't take too many bad stories coming from a referral source to be like, wow, I don't things are really changing over
Yeah.
there. That place
And
isn't
they're
as
not going to say it was I had too much of a deductible. They're going to say, well, it wasn't really working for me,
Yeah, exactly. And then physical therapy doesn't work. Yeah,
Right.
I tried. I mean, everybody listening to this has had a patient in front of them that has been like, yeah, I don't know about this physical therapy. I tried physical therapy, it didn't really work for me. Well, if you're not doing a good job of explaining everything in the front and explaining what a plan of care looks like, hey, this isn't going to be like 2 times a week for
Mhm.
4 weeks. Like, it's going to
Yeah.
be something a little bit longer than that. And if they don't understand that and don't have a full scope of what's going on, then if they're not getting better, they schedule twice a week. They cancel 2 of those appointments. They don't get back. I've been going for 2 weeks. Is not helping. I'm bailing. Physical therapy doesn't work for me. Well,
Right.
that's not helping anybody in our industry. So
Mhm.
making sure that you're keeping track of that is really, really important. And then that goes into graduation rate. So we've talked about that a little bit already. For us, we expect 80%. Our highest clinic last year was 84%. So for every 100 initial evaluations that came into that location, 84 of them successfully graduated. And I've got to define what that is in your practice. It doesn't always mean they've returned to every single thing they want to do, but has there been a successful resolution of this? Have I gotten out of this what I wanted to, as set up at the initial evaluation when I set up all my goals? And have I gotten to a max benefit of what that is? It's not always 100% recovery, but it just points to the idea of just looking at this entire plan of care and making sure not only the therapist and the company understands what a plan of care looks like, but the patient understands what that
So,
is. And
so Travis, in your practice, do you probably do this as a whole, right? But do you actually do it by therapists too? Their actual
oh yeah, we
graduation
definitely
rate?
do it by therapist.
That's
That's the
great.
number. Yeah, when we write a hat, so that's a job description for people that don't know what that terminology is. We have stats and substats. So the number one stat for every PT is your graduation rate. That's what the number one thing that you're judged on, because I mean, that is your job as a physical therapist for us. If we really focus in on that, like once you take on an initial evaluation, that's you. And sometimes we have, depending on the clinic and availability of physical therapists, sometimes the physical therapist just sees that patient for 1 or 2 visits, and then they're seen by another clinician because the schedule didn't line up to stay with that clinician,
Mhm.
or they're seeing a physical therapy assistant in our organization. But that PT is still in charge of making sure that that successful graduation happens. As soon as you do the initial evaluation, that's on your docket, and it's your job to make sure that you successfully graduate that.
Mhm.
And how much is poor performance costing you? Length of stay increases for one every 10%. You can bring this up. So again, for whatever reason, when we start looking at this successful graduation, just because if you're not used to doing case management, It usually is somewhere around like 30 to 40%. And same thing, you go to an owner and say, hey, what's your successful graduation? Well, we don't really look at it. I'm thinking like 80 or 90%. I know I did that. And when I first looked at it, it was 30%. I'm like, wow, like we're not doing a
Wow.
good job of case management.
Yeah.
And yeah, now our benchmark is 80 and everybody is typically around 83, 84%. Sometimes we'll get a little bit higher, but there's a big difference between like 30 and 40% and 80%. So where for what we see, if you let's say you started out at 50 and you improve this to 60 or 70, of course, across the course of the year, then you're going to see about a one in terms of your length of stay increasing for every
Mhm.
10%. If you're looking for, hey, should I really invest the time and effort into doing this? Then that's what you're looking at. And that's what we see in the data that we're pulling from the clients that we're working with.
And then again, the bigger that you get, like if you have two or three or four locations, right? And you have all these multiple therapists at each location, like how do you know the performance of the clinic, the individuals within this clinic? Like you need these metrics. And the ideally, like what gives you the ability to grow and not have to be over these things all the time is when the individuals know these numbers and they can operate and make decisions off of those numbers, right?
Yeah, and everybody should know what everybody else's number is. I know that makes people uncomfortable, but we look at scoring and we post all of those numbers publicly. So
Mhm.
everybody knows what every physical therapist graduation rate is. And if someone is lower, that's not put there in place to make them feel bad. It's to have them ask questions like, okay, why is mine so low? And, why is someone else so high? Well, start spending some time with that clinician. What are they doing consciously or unconsciously in order to get that high graduation rate?
Yeah.
So, yeah, to start out with this, you have to do active patient tracking. So if I go to each of my clinical directors and I say, how many active patients do you have under care right now? They better be able to tell me a number. Like I always say, if I wake you up in the middle of the night on Sunday, like you got to tell me what your active patients are. Because if you don't know where and how many your active patients are, then you can't manage those cases. So you need to know what active patient tracking is. That can be a long process, but it's something that you have to do if you want to be good at case management. Next one is schedule efficiency. So probably everybody measures this at some level, but it's the actual productivity divided by expected productivity. When we go and talk to practices, like what is the productivity expectation? And I'm starting to hear this now on interview when we have new grads that come in, which is great because they're like, okay, they might not use this terminology, but they'll say, how many patients am I expected to see per day or per week? You should know
Mhm.
that for your
Right.
practice. And you should be able to tell that to somebody so they have an idea of what the volume is. Depending on the state that you're in, that number can vary. In some people, on your treatment model, if it's one-on-one treatment model, and there's 40 hours in the week, then a full schedule would be 40,
Mhm.
depending on what you're doing there. For us, and based on our reimbursement, our staff clinicians are expected to see 60. Our PTs are expected to see 60 in a week. They're for 40-ish hours a week, taking out some time for meetings and that kind of thing. You're not going to have 100% arrival rate every week, right? So if the schedule was completely full, then that would look different, but you're going to have some cancellation rate in there. So we expect our PTs to see 60. Our PTAs expect to see a little bit more because they're not getting jammed up by initial evaluations. So they have more slots in the week than a typical PT will. And our clinical directors are expected to see less because they have more administrative coaching type activities. So they're expected to see 50. So if a clinical director sees 50 visits in a week, they're at 100% efficiency. And usually that efficiency number is where your profit margin is. For practices that are at a lower profit margin, for us, above anything below a 10% profit margin is going to be kind of dangerous. So it's going to be, you're one bad thing away from happening for there to be an issue. So
Mhm.
that's what we kind of look at. And typically, if our practices are like at 5, 8, 10%, that extra margin they're missing to get to like a healthier number, like we expect to see 20% profit margin to have a healthy business. That's where it is. It's because your staff is not as busy as they should be for lots of different reasons. But taking a look at this, if you're not looking at this now and section this out again, like you said, by not only just clinic, but by clinician and trying to find out, okay, why are these clinicians busier than others can give you some really good information. And next actions for that are just trying to find out if you don't have a productivity number expectation. Some people do this like patients per hour. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I don't really care how you do it as long as you standardize it. You do it the same way every time. And the clinician knows what that expectation is. So you want to try to have them getting full schedules. do your therapists want to have full schedules? That's a question you've got to ask yourself, right? So, in general, if there's cancellations in the schedule, are your clinicians upset about that? Or are they like, "Whew, I just got myself some breathing room and now I can catch up on my notes or go on Facebook or whatever they're doing?" And for us, what helped us out with that was just bonusing based on productivity.
Yeah.
So
I was
it
going to
never
ask you that if that was something that you recommend in your, or doing in your clinic or recommend to others.
Yeah, it's surprising that as we get further and further along here, student loans, at least for the kids that we're hiring, are getting higher and higher and higher.
Hmm.
Sometimes people are not motivated by money. You got to find out what motivates them. Sometimes people are more motivated by paid time off.
Do you want more freedom in your clinic? Then you need to work on your business, not just in it. The top practice owners know that they need a marketing system that consistently attracts patients from the internet. And at Practice Promotions, we've helped hundreds of practice owners skyrocket to the top of Google and get more new patients from online. Go to practicepromotions.net/kit to get our free practice marketing sample kit. It includes all our digital marketing tips and tricks that will get you new patients from Google. That's practicepromotions.net/kit, KIT, for a free marketing kit. And now back to the show.
So you've got to find out what your staff wants. But universally, it never made sense to me back when I worked for a large PT company. If I saw 40 in the week or I saw 80 in the week, I got paid the same thing. Like that was one of the big things that kind of got me thinking, maybe I should just try to go out on my own and see if I can get this
Yeah.
figured.
You're only working hard enough not to get fired.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So
So you want to incentivize for performance.
yeah. So, I mean, bonus structure, that's like its own webinar. But for us, I'll give you like just a quick productivity weekly bonus that we do. If you hit above your productivity number, like I talked about a few minutes ago, you're going to get paid immediately, like in your next paycheck. If you're, 3 or 4 above that, as soon as you get above 60 for a PT, you're going to get an extra $100 in your check. Is that a huge amount of life-changing money? No, but it's a way to say, hey, man, you really kicked some butt last week. Like, here's an immediate reward. And then there's longer term rewards like quarterly rewards, and then of course our big annual reward. One of our big goals this year is to give over $250,000 away in bonuses. Like then that is in our OKRs, which again is another webinar, but everybody knows that. Like we talk about that at every meeting, like our goal, and we have a weekly total that we kind of put together. So productivity bonuses, mini game bonuses are if our profitability hits 20% for the whole company, that's when everybody gets their big bonus. And if we can do that, then we'll give out over $250,000 in bonuses in our organization this year, and we make that publicly known. So if the company does better, then it just makes sense for the employees to do better. Okay. All right, so we're getting into Neil's wheelhouse here. So initial evaluation bucketing. As we're starting to look at this, we're finding that people are not holding their marketing accountable. So you have given tons of webinars on this, but knowing exactly where your new patients are coming from is really, really important, because if you're spending money, like we're expecting to spend 10% of revenue on marketing, we want to make sure that we're spending it in the right places. I think one of the things I heard initially, well, 50% of my marketing works. I'm just not sure which 50%, right? So that's you just kind of throw as much money as you can at it and hope that it works. If you've ever done lunches with physicians and asked them about marketing, they probably have the least idea of what's going on. They're like, I had a physician once. Yeah, I saw him in the newspaper all the time. This is, I mean, back when newspapers were big. You can tell how old I'm, how long I've been doing this, Neil. And I said, "How much you spend in newspaper?" I said, "Oh, we spend 10 grand a week." I was like, 10 grand a week? And I'm like, "Is it working?" And he's like, "I don't know, but I'm too afraid to turn it off."
To
So
stop it. Yeah.
I just keep doing it. Like,
Yeah.
all right, that's a strategy, I guess, but knowing where the patients are coming from and bucketing them properly is really important. I work with Lee Sourboats. If you guys know him, like his bucketing is bananas. It's way too complicated for me. He's got like 16 or 18 buckets that he'll identify people and put them into because he runs a little bit more complicated marketing systems than I do. I have 6. Every patient that comes in falls into one of those 6 buckets. And then we track that every week and try to find out if our efforts are resulting in things that we want to see there. And if we're dumping a bunch of money into one of those buckets and not getting the results, then we have to kind of adjust fire. The time to do that is probably sooner than later. I mean, you can't just like run a marketing campaign for 2 weeks and if it doesn't work, stop doing it. There's certain times there, but you do have to hold it accountable and just see, hey, if I'm spending a bunch of money, I'm not getting the return that I want, then we've got to start making some other decisions for that. And we find that practices are not doing a great job of tracking that. And I don't know, Neil, you tell me what you kind of suggest. Whose job is it to find out where the patient came from in terms of marketing?
That should definitely be on the marketing coordinator, right? Like that's part of knowing what's happening in the clinic, what's working, right? And so
Yeah.
at the end of the day, that's got to trickle up obviously to the owner, right? Of having that information. But if you're big enough, you should have a marketing coordinator in their clinic, and that's one of the things they should be gathering for you on a constant basis.
Yeah. And then so the marketing coordinator is not treating all the patients that are coming in every day. So they have to kind of have communication with whoever is in charge of doing that. I'll tell you in the beginning, it used to be we would have someone, whoever answered the phone would try to find out how they found out about us. Well, when patients call in, they just want to kind of make their appointment and they don't want to be on the phone for a really long time. So sometimes whoever answered the phone would have a hard time getting that information. So then we would ask it from the front desk. We would put it on a piece of paper that they would fill out. Hey, how did you hear about us? And then we would get kind of inconsistent or inaccurate data. And what we decided to do, and it's completely up to you, but it kind of goes to our case management. We ask our clinical directors to find that information. So it's every initial evaluation that comes in, there's a separate sheet, and we have to ask them sometimes kind of pointed questions about where they found out about us. And it's not, they're here to answer questions about their shoulder pain or their knee pain, but finding out how they first found out about our practice is really important. And so just making sure that we have that information and it's accurate and it's just not, it's I found out about you on the internet. Well, any practice that works with you, there's lots of different fingers that you guys have in the internet that you're kind of putting out. Did you find us on a blog? Did you search for us on Google? Did you see our Google ad, Facebook, all that different stuff? So you've got to try to section that out because you're spending money in that area and you want to try to hold it accountable. So you just have to have a system for capturing that. So if you walk away from this webinar, like go to wherever this is happening, your front desk or your clinicians, like, hey guys, we've got to try to find out where these patients are coming from because we want to know if our marketing is effective. Initial evaluation arrival rate. Okay, so I left this one last because we did our annual planning a couple months ago, and it was something that I wasn't paying close enough attention to. And it wasn't until I did the math that I found out that it's probably going to be one of our main focuses this year. So this is, and again, another thing that you'll ask practice owners, what's your initial evaluation arrival rate? Well, I don't really track that, but I'm sure they all come in. Like everybody that schedules an initial, they must all come in, right, Neil?
Yeah.
So we started looking at it a while ago and we found out every week we would look at it and we averaged 90%. We're like, oh, that's pretty good. And what we would say is if, so at each of our clinics, we have all our clinical directors meet. And if we saw numbers like, hey, your initial evaluation arrival rate last week was 60%, that's pretty low. It goes into red. Anything that's not above 90 is going to go into yellow or red. And so it needs to be addressed. And we're like, well, what happened? Oh, yeah, two of the initial evaluations were sick and they said they would call back. And I was like, well, did they call back and schedule? No, but they will. It'll be fine. Like, okay, if we didn't really keep a good eye on that. And I said, well, what if they're not calling back? So we looked at our initial evaluation arrival rate last year was 90.4%. If we hit 95%, you're not going to get 100, okay? People cancel. They're like, I ended up going to see another doctor, or oh, I went on Facebook and I saw an ad and there's a place close to me. I ended up going there. You're not going to get 100%. But what if we change that from 90.4 to 95%? That would have been an extra $250,000 in revenue for us.
Wow.
So that number can be higher or lower for you. But what we've done now is have a system to try to find out, okay, if someone cancels that initial evaluation, if they're not immediately rescheduled, meaning we just move their appointment from this week into the following week when they reschedule, then we've got to have someone that's in charge of making sure that we find out what happened to them. And again, we look at it as lost revenue because we're owners of the practice, but it's really more for us, again, case management. Like this patient was sent by their doctor or sent by a friend or family member. If they trust us to get them to whatever successful resolution looks like, then it's our job to do that. So if they get sick or they go on vacation or didn't work out, we've got to try to follow up with them. So we're trying to look at this year, how many total cases did we lose? Sometimes patient calls and yeah, I'm going to PT at the hospital because they got me in sooner. You're going to lose some of them, but changing from like 90 to 95%, we feel like that's reasonable. And for us, that's what it's going to mean in revenue. But again, looking at it from the picture of it's our job to make sure that they're getting a successful resolution. If they go somewhere else for physical therapy and it's not as good a quality as what we feel like we can give and they fall off their plan of care, well, we've got to take some responsibility for that. So you need to have someone that owns that stat in your org, and that's what we're working on this year. And then start looking at patient indoctrination. So when someone makes an initial evaluation, depending on how long it is, like sometimes people call up today, they have an eval tomorrow. Well, we probably don't need to indoctrinate them a ton in the next 12 hours. But if someone goes further out, maybe they do go on vacation. I'm going on vacation this week. I'm going to come, 14 days from now. Well, what happens between now and 14 days? Are they getting information from us? Are they getting to know us a little bit better? Even like quick videos that we can send them about shoulder pain, or a blog post, or some kind of content that kind of separates you from other people, places that they might be looking at in between now and then. I think that's going to be important. So we're doing a
Very
better
much.
job of that. So yeah,
Yeah, I would say the longer that they go, the longer that time span is, the higher probability of them dropping or not even starting, right? So yeah, I was always a big proponent of, if they were, I think if they were 3 or 4 days out in our practice, we would send them like one of our folders, one of our kits in the mail, right? So they get that before they come in. And, now you've got automated email sequences that can be going out. So you got to make sure that you can, have all at least their contact information, especially their email and text. And, there's lots of different systems out there for text reminders and email, but like, where can you get them to start joining your Facebook, or give them some tips and advice before they even come in, and start to create that rapport with them?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you said that about putting something in the mail. Like, where is it very difficult to compete with people sometimes these days, is like your inbox or like digital type of communication. Where is there, now less competition? I think in mailboxes. Like,
Absolutely. Yep.
if I was getting medical services, physical therapy, chiropractic, doctor, dental, whatever, and I got something in the mail from that practitioner in between now when I schedule the appointment and when I
Mhm.
actually come in for it, man, I would be indoctrinated, right? I'd be more invested in it. I want to learn more about it. And I think that could be super powerful.
Definitely.
So once you have these nailed down, there's other things that we look at. I work with practice owners that look at hundreds and hundreds of metrics. I try to get it to like the minimum effective dose, because I start looking at too many numbers, it gets kind of wishy-washy for me. But other things that we look at that you might want to look at: visit frequency. So this is one that I left out of here, although it's really, really important for us. The more frequently people are getting physical therapy, typically the better they're going to be. So if you're seeing somebody once a week and they're not even missing some appointments, the chances of me fixing them or helping them out or making them feel a little bit better go down the less frequently I see them. Space utilization, we started to look at this, and you probably have heard, if you've heard other people talk about physical therapy in terms of how many visits can you see per square foot. For every 1,000 square feet that we have, we feel like we could see 100 visits a week. There's different ways to look at that equation, but when you're looking at expanding, adding new locations, have you filled up the current space that you have and before moving on to others? So we're starting to look at that a little bit more this year. And again, I was same thing. I was like, oh yeah, we're using like most of our space. And what we found out is we were only like 60 to 65% of our space utilization for the year. It's like, okay, as we're adding more clinics, why don't we try to fill up the ones that we already have? Revenue per hour. This is a new one that we're looking at. And this, again, skews a little bit more business side of stuff. But as you're getting a little bit more sophisticated on the finance and business side of stuff, that can be something that you're looking at. Revenue per full-time equivalent. This is kind of an efficiency number. We take that for all of our staff, clinical and administrative, and just trying to find out, how much revenue are we generating per full-time equivalent in our organization. And cost per customer acquisition, again, a thing that you talk a ton about, Neil. You want to try to find out, how much is it costing me every time that I get a new patient. So if I hope this stuff has been helpful for you guys. If you want some more in terms of how to implement this, systems and these metrics, we're doing a live event that's coming up April 19th and 20th in Nashville. So if you're in the area and you want to come, or you want to try to fly in, Nashville's a really fun town, then we're doing a live event. So if you guys do not know what our live events are, Neil will give you this landing page with all the information in it. But basically, it's just different sessions that we do that focus in on different aspects of physical therapy that we keep getting coming up over and over again with our clients. So for this one that we're doing, we're actually focusing a little bit more on marketing. So our morning sessions are going to be physician marketing, partner workshops, clinic expansion, which you're going to need marketing if you're going to expand. We have some guest speakers that are coming in. We've got active patient tracking. So we talked about that in this webinar. If you're not actively tracking your patients, we're going to give you a tool to help you out with that. Chuck Schulte, if you guys have seen him talk about this, he mastered this a long time ago, and it's been huge in our practice. Revenue per visit, kind of looking at that like we talked about. Patient indoctrination, we talked about that a little bit. Arlen probably does the best I've ever seen of a practice doing this in terms of getting them on board and coming into their practice. He's incredible at it. In day 2, we're talking more about revenue cycle management. So that's more kind of the billing stuff that we work on our end. So units per visit, revenue per visit, code selection. So now you're kind of understanding AMA rules versus Medicare rules. Now it's like, okay, we talked about that a little bit in this webinar where it's like, are you picking the codes that the insurance company wants to see? Accounts receivable management. So really your accounts receivable over 60 days should be under 5%. When we first look at that, and again, it's when I was doing when we looked at ours is over 30%. I'm like, well, we're going to get paid eventually, right? That's just going to happen. Like people are just going to pay us. That's actually not the case. So we're going to show you the power of that. And then just different workshops about using AI and VAs to accelerate your organic content. That we've seen some really cool stuff with recently. And then selling a plan of care. So just making sure that a patient understands exactly what's going on with physical therapy. So that was a ton of me talking. I want to try to help practice owners out as much as possible. We love live events. It's our favorite thing to do. We do 2 of them a year at least. And getting in front of people across the table from practice owners is really important to us. If you guys have any questions about that, all my contact information Neil will give to you. You can set up a call with me to see if this event is a right fit for you and see if we can help you out and help improve your practice this year in 2024.
Awesome. Yeah, that looks great. Wish I could go. But I'm busy. But yeah, that looks like a lot of fun there. Definitely tons and tons of great information content. And Travis, thank you so much for sharing that today. I think for a lot of practice owners, we know they need to be looking at these different metrics, but sometimes we don't have the clarity on certain things or how to measure them in the way that's the most useful. And I think you've definitely figured that out. So being able to teach other people, how to do that. And then certainly with physicaltherapybilling.com's, you have that all dialed in and getting amazing results for clients. So yeah, so I just want to say thanks for being on here, and we'll definitely get that link out to everybody, but definitely check out physicaltherapybilling.com and Next Level Physical Therapy group. Want to definitely join their Facebook group. That's a great resource for you. Travis is always on there chatting with folks. So thanks, Travis, and I look forward to having you on our webinar again.
Thanks, Neil. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Practice Marketing Podcast. Don't forget to get your free practice marketing sample kit at practicepromotions.net/kit. Start 2024 off the right way by building marketing systems that automatically attract new patients from online. That's practicepromotions.net/kit.